couple of them, a father and a son, lived in the neighbourhood of Hogarth. I just wanted to show you this, just to draw some links, good word, between the last two papers and mine. And this is a painting by a Dutch man who died at the age of 28, who was patronised by the wealthy landowners, as most people were at that time. And it's called, I stumbled across it, who knows where, about 6 months ago. And it's called The Life of a Hunter, and it's 14 panels. And it portrays the life of a wealthy Dutch landholder, who is elegantly dressed, has lots of money, and employs hunting dogs. And the panels start off at the right-hand side at the top, and it doesn't actually really matter in the right way you start on the outside, but they go around the picture, and they eventually move to the middle of the upper to this one. And the hunter hunts hares and rabbits and deer, and occasionally exotic animals, such as lions and tigers and elephants. And they have, the elephants have captured the hunter, and they put him on trial, and he is convicted, and he is sentenced to death. And in the panel below that, you can actually see two of his dogs, his hunting dogs, hanging from a tree, and the hunter is at the lower left on a spit. He's being roasted, no doubt as geese were at that time, while still alive, roasted to death. I just thought that would be the honest truth is that I was going to I actually had a couple of choices, but that was one to begin with, and it has, I think, some relevance to today. Okay, so I want to, this paper today is about the word therocide. I've been toying with the word therocide for about 5 or 6 years, and I've done nothing with it. And in the same way that I blew the term animal sexual assault when I came up with the phrase interspecies sexual assault, should be animal sexual assault, it took me a couple of years to get through that one. I have also, although I was only mentioned it twice in a couple of, an essay in a book, I mentioned it originally as therocide. And for the reasons that I'll get into soon, it should be thericide, and so you can read it, so there's no point in repeating it. I'm not using PowerPoint, I've never done that in my life. I've struggled to get this stuff up, so here it is. I mean, I can, if you like, I'm sure. Yeah, you can read that if you like. And underneath it is a summary of my paper, which I'm about to launch into. I'll just let you read that in a second. Okay. It's going. I hope it's gone. Is it? Yes. All right. So, you know, one never knows whether to talk because of to frame what one does in terms of a specific audience, the one here today. But since I don't know, I only know maybe 6 of you. I've not met you before, and I don't know what your interests or background are. So I'm just going to have to deliver this as I've written it, and I was writing it this morning, and so Angus doesn't have the current copy, which I gave him yesterday to print off. I've done work on it since, and I have to tell you that this is the first time that I've spoken about this in public, this particular concept of thericide. So this is an excuse. I'm building up to an excuse. The excuse is that I'm nervous. I was about to say, because I've never spoken before, I am nervous, but I'm often hyper, so I'm nervous now. So anyway, here we go. The summary is that I want to be able to describe the killing of animals. I want a word, I want to name it, because we have lots of words in English for the killing of humans by humans. We don't have one word. We have homicide in English for humans killing each other, but we don't have a word in English for animals being killed by humans. So I think that that is a problem. If I have, well, just bear with me 1 second if you would. This trackpad is sticky today, and I was hoping to have a mouse, but I don't. Okay, so the summary is that I'm going to start off. What I want to talk about to begin with is slaughterhouses. And not just slaughterhouses as they exist today, but I want to talk about the invisibility with which animals are killed in slaughterhouses, silently and invisibly, and how that has changed since Jeremy Bentham's idea of the panopticon. It's intimately bound up with regimes like that. So, the viewing, and I do apologise, I normally take pride in speaking extemporaneously. I'm still working on this. I would be terribly grateful for any suggestions for how it can be improved, other than rewriting the whole thing. But I'm aware of some weaknesses and probably unaware of major other ones, but I'd be most grateful for feedback, either by email afterwards or in the next 2 hours when we're here. So we'll begin. The viewing of exotic animals in early modern Europe was transformed by the Royal Menagerie at Versailles. Designed by the architect Lavaux, it was, according to Michel Foucault, a source of inspiration for Jeremy Bentham's all-seeing panopticon. Unlike other menageries, its layout was not distributed according to the principles of a park. At its centre was an octagonal pavilion, one side consisting of a door leading to the royal salon, a single room from which, without being seen, the monarch could gaze outwards and into 7 cages, each of which contained a different animal species. By Bentham's time, Foucault relates in Discipline and Punish, this menagerie had disappeared, but one finds in the programme of the Panopticon a similar concern with individualising observation, with characterisation and classification, with the analytical arrangements of space. The Panopticon is a royal menagerie. The Panopticon as a royal menagerie, the animal is replaced by man on the Panopticon, individual distribution by specific grouping, and the king by the machinery of a furtive power, the new state. Famously, of course, Bentham afterwards drew up his Panopticon inspection house as a technology of power, whereby with maximum efficiency and economy, discipline could be imposed on isolated human individuals in prisons, workhouses, factories, madhouses, schools, hospitals, and leproseries. In Foucault's heavily truncated account, panopticism emerged as an architectural principle from the colonization and siting of animals, subjugated animals, of course. However, it must be noted that at the same time that Foucault suggested that with the programme of the panopticon, the animal is replaced by man, he of course chose altogether to ignore fundamental changes in the architecture of the ways in which the original inmates were dominated. At first, it was a handful of exotic and individualised animals who were catalogued and made ready for royal inspection in the designated space of a panoptic menagerie. But new tastes are cultivated. Time progresses, control is reinvented and applied in new sites, in hugely increasing numbers. Animals in hugely increasing numbers, animals were reared in or moved to invisible sites for their transformation into edibles. At these concealed sites, they were slaughtered and gutted and processed and packaged, I'm making this up because I've just lost my space, and packaged and transported for human consumption. So the first section within this early section called killing sites is called killing at a distance. The original sense of caedere, to cut or to fell, is also the source of the French abattoir, where the felling of trees is used as a euphemism for both the rendering of animals to a horizontal position and also the slight of their slaughter. The abattoir was introduced in the Napoleonic era during a reorganisation of slaughtering and butchery that banned private slaughterhouses and mandated that they be built far from urban centres. The intention behind this relocation was that in the transformation of a living being into an edible commodity, there be a disassociation between, on the one hand, the killing of an animal, slaughter, and on the other, the carving up of her body and the draining of her blood, butchery. The disassociation between the killing and the butchery of animals can be better understood by reference to the emergence of large-scale killing sites in England. In medieval and early modern English society, there were numerous spaces where animals were killed for food. Among them were shambles, knackers' yards, slaughterhouses, and individual households. The social organisation of these killing sites seems entirely to have differed according to their location, their degree of visibility, and their size. A shambles, or shamble house first, is of uncertain origin. It has referred to both a mess or a bloody mess where animals' blood is shed, and also to a place where butchers kill animals and sell their meat, and also to stalls or benches on which butchers expose meat for sale. Acknowledgement to Skeat's Etymological Dictionary of the English Language. Knacker's yard, second, appeared in the late 16th century. A knacker may have been a maker of harness and saddle for horses. Somewhat later, he became a person whose trade it was to buy, quote, worn-out, diseased, or useless horses, and to slaughter them for their hides and hoofs actually in this HWS, and for making dog's meat, etc., otherwise known as a horse slaughterer. A knacker's yard was the enclosed area where horse slaughterers conducted their business. The 12th century English slaughter originally referred to the killing of both humans and animals, often on a large scale with blood aplenty. Comes from the Old Norse, I don't know how to pronounce it, slather, and Icelandic slaughter. Slaughterhouse, appeared in 14th century Middle English. About a century later, it was expressed in English law as a description of the site for the killing of beasts had and done in the butchery, Henry VII Act. In 1700, most Londoners still lived either with domesticated animals or in great proximity to them. Quite apart from the emergence of petting practices in the 17th century, urban dwellers often kept horses for transport and hauling and cows for milk. In their cellars they fattened pigs and kept chickens for their eggs. Barely 50 years later, the expanding production of animals as edibles began to resemble that of other commodities in a large-scale capitalist enterprise. By 1750, right on William Hogarth's doorstep, although that's the only, Hogarth is not mentioned in this paper. By 1750, roughly 11,000 sheep and 1,400 cattle were driven each week through London's congested streets and herded into London's medieval meat market in West Smithfield. To the cattle and sheep turned into edibles at Smithfield must be added an untold number of birds, chickens, ducks, geese, horses, and pigs. It is not too hard to imagine the sound, the smell, and the sight of terrified animals on their chaotic journey to slaughter at Smithfield. Consider the dreadful din of cattle bellowing, sheep bleating, pigs squealing, ducks hissing, and geese honking. Aggravating this spiralling cacophony were horses who neighed and whinnied, stray dogs who barked, whimpered, and whined, and cats who screeched. All these animals deposited a mass of fecal matter as they were driven along London's narrow thoroughfares. For a moment, also imagine how this unappetizing smell was exacerbated by heavy rains, for example, or when the terrified animals were harassed by reckless drovers and maddened by savage dogs. Having arrived at Smithfield, these animals were taken by buyers elsewhere. Those animals not taken by buyers elsewhere were killed in undrained cellars, sheds, and outhouses. Exhausted horses were slaughtered in nearby knackers' yards. Of the numerous ways in which modernity transformed human-animal relationships, none is more significant than the new regimes for producing food from animals' flesh. Spatially and linguistically, their purpose was to conceal and to deceive. To satisfy the pained sensibilities of polite and educated society, tanneries, fish cleaners, and slaughterhouses were moved away to rural areas or otherwise masked. In this respect, at least, the commodified subjects of slaughterhouses were rendered invisible. the very opposite of the inmates of the panopticon. On the one hand, this large-scale animal killing was deftly hidden from the citizenry, as Keith Thomas gently puts it. The concealment of slaughterhouses from the public eye had become a necessary device to avoid too blatant a clash between material facts and private sensibilities. On the other, because of the division of labour within slaughterhouses, about only a tiny fraction of workers could it be thought that they actually participated or even saw the moment of an animal's death. Killing euphemisms is the next part in this play on the word killing euphemisms. Several other strategies have helped to hide the messy business of killing animals for food. For example, no longer do cookbooks recommend in grotesque detail techniques for the softening and the roasting of flesh while alive of eels, geese, ducks and pigs. Around the end of the 18th century, writes Keith Thomas again, there seems to have been a growing tendency to conceal the slaughtered creature's more recognised features. At the table, hares, rabbits, pigs and fishes are no longer served with their heads attached. Other sops to squeamish sensibilities include abeyance of any vernacular deemed too coarse and uncouth or too close to the bone. With the advent of modernity, one finds that offending plants and animals are therefore renamed. For plants, exit, black maidenhair, pissabed, mare's fart, priest's bullocks, and prick, madam. For animals, enter, beef, mutton, veal, pork, bacon, sausage, pate, terrine, and Rocky Mountain oysters. I made a link there. Excuse me. Strategically in tandem with the invisibility of animals in slaughterhouses is their elusiveness in discourses of lethality. Real killed animals tend to be avoided or hidden with terms like cull, catch, crop, both live and dressed, harvest and sacrifice. Some of these terms do duty in different discourses. Cull, for example, is also known as animal population control, artificial selection, nuisance wildlife management, selective breeding, and game management. Sometimes culling or putting down is used as Orwellian speak for the killing of BSE infected cattle. It is also used by ecologically minded hunters to refer to the killing and removal of weaker animals in a herd, or to police and eliminate undesirable predators, wolves and coyotes, for example, which threaten more desirable species. That's where I'd like to have a talk about the three papers together on that bit. I'll just say it again. It is also used by ecologically minded hunters to refer to the killing and removal of weaker animals in a herd, or to police and eliminate undesirable predators, which threaten more desirable species. In a variety of hunting discourses, the dead bodies of game are referred to as the catch, bag, yield, take and harvest, or, when coupled with sound ecological practices, as responsible harvest. Euphemisms rule. Just in the jargon of killing foxes, for example, hunters refer to the imminent killing or the moment of killing of the quarry as to account for, bowl over, break up, bring to book, chop, deal with, punish and roll over. Heads of killed foxes are named masks, paws, pads, and tails, brushes. A harvest also refers to the killing of fish, as does strike, or to the number of animals killed. When animals are dissected and killed during scientific experimentation and vivisection, they are commonly referred to as sacrifices, subjects, objects, and products. After extraction of their organs and tissue, and when they have no more use value, putting them to death is humanely termed euthanasia. Animals killed by the military, collateral damage. About what follows next, I must make it quite clear that I have no wish to engage in moralising. I do not therefore explore the contested merits of Joan Denier's claim in her book Speciesism that, quote, lawmakers have characterised lethal trapping of non-humans as lawful killing. They could just as easily characterise it as murder. I wish only to name animal killing for what it is. If the killing of an animal by a human is as harmful to her as homicide is to a human, then the proper naming of such a death offers a remedy, however small, to the extensive privileging of human lives over those of other animals. So let me begin now by talking now into thericide, which is the next block of this paper. In their approach to homicide, Latin homo, man, plus caedere, to cut, strike, murder or kill, most law and criminology textbooks in England and Wales define their subject matter with a short definition like homicide is the killing of one human being by another. The distinction is then illustrated with historical examples. These often start with 17th and 18th century commentaries on the common law by learned jurists like Edward Coke and William Blackstone. They proceed with the concepts of actus reus and mens rea, and then move onwards to statutory legislation and to the emergence of mid-19th century defences such as the insanity rule, duress and coercion. At some point, fine distinctions are made between lawful and unlawful homicide and between one level of culpability and another, murder, manslaughter, and further subdivisions between first and second degree murder, and so on. Our model text would then selectively expound chapter by chapter on several types of criminal homicide. There are about 20 types of murder and manslaughter named and from which to choose, each named in short form as a side word, -CIDE word. Most of these side words identify consanguinity between offender and victim, such as matricide, patricide, fratricide, sororicide, though a few are based on role or status incumbency, such as regicide, tyrannicide, and the recent clinicide and gendercide. If they are committed multiple times, some murders are then subdivided according to whether they were committed in one place, mass homicide, genocide, or over time, serial homicide. Surprisingly, perhaps, there are numerous side words that refer to animals killed by humans. Among them are avicide, bovicide, ceticide, and macropocide. While these words are mostly constructed according to some biological taxonomy, some are more aggressively speciesist than others. This is surely the case with besticide, pesticide, and verminicide. Each of these three is also a name for lethal chemical agents. Their use and content are subject to considerable cultural variation and can at times result in arachnicide, herbicide, insecticide, lupicide, muricide, rodenticide, serpenticide, talpicide, and vulpicide. Yeah, common words, but they are in the English language. Note how, with just one word, we, without too much ambiguity, refer to all those unnatural deaths where humans have been illegally killed by other humans as homicide. Thus, in 2013, homicide rates in Australia, the UK and the US were at 40-year lows, or homicide has been a daily fact of life in Mesopotamia since the 2003 invasion. However, there is no such unitary term for the killing of animals, though some of their deaths can arguably be counted within the scope of the expansive biocide and ecocide. There's a lot more to be said on that, not today. I propose therocide as the name to remedy their absence. In what follows, I just want to make some brief comments on its etymology, definition, and scope. So, etymology. I'm going to cut that very short. I started off just really vaguely, and just a word in a sentence here or there, with the idea of therocide being the right word. And I've only been able, 5 or 6 years ago, I've only been able to get to this in the last, I've been working on this for the last couple of months, I suppose. And so I've gone from therocide to thericide. In retrospect, both because therocide has an awkward tongue-between-teeth feel to it, and because it deviates from that of othercide, I recommend therocide for the killing of an animal by a human. Therocide combines the ancient Greek therion with the Latin caedere. The Greek therion was a prosaic variant of ther, which seems originally to have meant beast of prey, but was later extended to other animals, probably to include both wild and domesticated animals, and also metaphorical monsters. Linguistic purists will perhaps object that thericide is a hybrid, and therefore an inferior neologism, but stuffiness towards the use of hybrids has been waning of late. None of us shudders very often, or at least not for that reason, when we use words like television, for example, or hyperactive, or criminology. As an alternative name for the killing of animals, zoocide has the apparent advantage that zoo already names the site where animals are used as objects of spectacle and entertainment, but that usage carries with it a heavy cultural baggage. Moreover, though the word Greek zoon means a living being, including animals, as opposed to a plant, phyton, the verb it is cognate with, zou, is also used for human life. Another candidate, the would-be animalicide, has the same problem, that it at once refers both to humans and to animals other than humans. Worse still, it would be an anthropocentric derivation from the Sanskrit origin of animal, that which is to be feared. So, the definition of homicide, I'll repeat that in shortened form. It may be defined as those human actions that cause the unnatural death of an animal. Therocide may be socially acceptable or unacceptable, legal or illegal. It may be intentional or unintentional, and involve active maltreatment or passive neglect. It may be committed one-on-one, one-on-one in small groups, or in large social institutions. Any useful definition invites numerous questions, of course. Just to begin with, consider its first sentence. Therocide may be defined as those diverse human actions that cause the unnatural death of an animal. Here we need at least to know which living creatures should be counted as animals. To move forwards from this question demands that we confront a minefield of heated issues. Should, for example, some Linnaean taxonomy or phylogenetic scale to be used to determine who should or what should be counted as an animal? Great apes, mammals, vertebrates, invertebrates? If at the end of this discovery process, sentience is identified as the lowest common denominator of animalhood, then how precisely is the ability to feel pain to be understood and to be measured? Some will perhaps want to draw a dividing line somewhere between a shrimp and a mollusk, or a mosquito. Does it matter in terms of what we call the latters, the mosquito's swatted death, or is it her death or its death, whether the mosquito we kill is a female biting or not? Or consider also, for purposes of designating an animal's death as unnatural and human-induced, what counts as an unnatural death might mean. Animals' deaths can be divided into two sorts, natural and unnatural, and both of those, what they mean, are quite contentious. Every phrase in the definition that I've offered, or the creation of the word and then the definition of it, is contentious. Consider, for example, the sentence, therocide may be socially acceptable or unacceptable, legal or illegal, which also has obviously just a staggering amount of issues in. Social acceptability or unacceptability, legality or delinquency. These are to me, these are manufactured by technologies of power. They are ultimately all part of the problem, and they are irrelevant to proper naming. If someone wishes to debate the meaning of much or nearly all anti-cruelty legislation, for example, in Ireland in 1635, in the two liberties, actually Liberty 91 and 92 of the 1641 banning of cruelty to animals in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, or in a 1658 proclamation but quite ineffective and soon to be repealed ban on cockfighting and bear baiting emanated from the Cromwellian Protectorate, or in England's Martin Act of 1822, and then the setting up of the RSPCA in the early 1830s through still today, then let's go to it. Consider more sentences then. That I would like to me the major area, there are 6 major areas where therocide, the naming of animals' deaths, animals killed by humans. I'm not necessarily saying that they are necessarily subject to criminal prosecution. That is for an entirely different, it raises an entirely different set of issues, and which I'm really not competent and have little interest in judging. But I will say that the areas that I'd like to see the word therocide used in particular, because they're the most common, this is not necessarily in any particular order, though it might refer to the volume of animals killed. First of all, climate change. Secondly, food production. Third, vivisection. Fourth, hunting. Fifth, animal trafficking. And 6, war. Do you know, I've got quite a bit, if you'll excuse me, I'm actually getting quite tired. I hope that's okay. I'm going to end now. I think I couldn't add to that anymore, really.
Do you want to take some questions?
I'd love to, Angus.
Okay.
If you have it, if there are any, yes, I will.
I anticipate there may be, but any questions? Nick first, not a surprise.
Thank thank you for the etymological tour, and particularly reminding me of the Foucauldian gloss on Bentham, which reminded me of some discussion in the birding community about whether using CCTV for bird watching was real or proper bird watching. And obviously I looked up Therocide on a well-known search engine, and it immediately came up with a disinfectant.
Yes, it does.
And then when I spelt it properly, it came up with today's talk. So that's a bit tricky, and I was therefore wondering whether something actually plainer English,
such as
spades being animal killing.
Animal killing. I understand that. I mean, whatever word you come up with, it's a compromise. And I'm acutely aware that Therocide is a commercial brand of pest control, animal killer. I'm aware that non-balance. I mean, the word Therocide commercially used is not very well known, and I hope that perhaps after I'm no longer here, if the word is used, I meant that in several senses actually. If the word is used, Therocides, to refer to all animal killing, I'd be really happy if people felt that they couldn't call those. There are a couple of companies that produce that and call it that. I'd be happy if they had to call it something else. Yeah, there's a. So if you write, now animal killing won't do. It's got to be one word. It's got to end in side, and you see the problem that we've got. You see, here's the problem. Can I tell you?
Yeah.
Here's the problem. The problem is that why non-human animals is not an advance over animals. The usage of it and thinking about feminist objections to animals. The reason that non-human animals is not an advance over animals. Animals, of course, include both humans and animals other than humans. When you talk about non-human animals, you're actually well. That is to privilege humans. It's like talking. It's like saying women are non-male humans. It's exactly the same. And I would. So if you say the killing of animals, so I want to ask, okay, what kind of animals are those? So we want a word that is different from. It can't have animals in it. It's got to be a word. I'm sure of that. I'm not sure of that. I've thought about it a long time, and therefore I'm just probably wrong for a long time. But I don't think that will work. The word can't have animals in it. What do you think?
Though the animals, as they are often known by killing. No, that's even getting too
You see, the problem is that I identified that there are about 50 different words for killing individual species of animals, such as rodenticide or whatever. And what I'm trying to find is a word that is the same as homicide for the killing of humans, as just one simple word, and we know what it means. And in the same way that homicide is not necessarily illegal. I'm not saying that these are illegal, but I want. Why can't we just justify? Why, instead of the development of slaughterhouses, instead of locking this stuff away in the military industrial complex, or in research laboratories, or in slaughterhouses away, let's be upfront and let's call it what it is. It is animal killing, but let's just have a simple word. Yes.
Given that we already used the word, and I think that your objection is going to be because it associates too much with a particular institution, suicide, which would be the natural, would be the natural fit, wouldn't it, with homicide or?
I don't understand that at all.
Well, we use the word for zoonosis or things like that.
Yes, suicide.
Zoology.
Yeah.
So we have a concept.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate you might not want it because it has an association also with a thing.
It has an association with a very unwelcome social sign for animals, zoos. And I said it carries so much cultural baggage, but you're right. So suicide, it's got too much baggage.
Would that not possibly then?
With respect.
No, you don't need a respect to me, honestly. but I
you may regret saying that.
I was only getting in quicker before.
I think I said that actually on that particular word. It has such heavy baggage.
You did, but that is the understanding of a word at the moment, and represents our understanding of the institution. But if you adopt the word, surely the word itself can build itself an identity. I mean, the whole point about language is that words can develop that identity. So, if it could have it might not necessarily have that baggage in the future.
I'm very grateful to you for that point, and I will think about it some more. And it is one of the words that is, perhaps it's the only word. I'll think about that.
I mean, potentially it's an appropriate word. I'm aware I'm meant to be chairing and not speaking, but I think the potential difference is, as Piers has said, when you're talking about thericide, although it's a pesticide, it's not a widely known and universally adopted word, a used word, in the same way that zoo is, and not just has baggage, but it has a historical baggage attached to it. So the question is whether you can suitably appropriate the word and change its current cultural resonance. And that, I would suggest that could take too long.
Animals are killed in zoos in various ways, and on the way to arriving in zoos.
Yeah.
But I agree, it could be. I'll think about that, and I've actually already thought about it, but I'm very open to thinking about it some more.
I think we might nudge you towards it eventually. David.
I was going to suggest nudging you away from it as someone who's unfamiliar with either term. Certainly, zooicide doesn't mean anything to me. As soon as I hear it, though, as soon as I hear it in this context, I immediately think of the more sort of common
Suicide.
No, I think of zoos.
Yes.
So I think, I'm with you.
Thank you very much.
That's where I would come. As someone who's not heard of the term zooicide, whereas obviously lots of people have, but I imagine most people haven't.
Yeah.
It's not used very often. Dictionary has enough, mate.
Yeah. It's not used very often.
That's the reason to reject it.
It's not used very often. And so I mean, obviously, I need to think about that some more. But thank you very
the
much.
audience you're looking at is much bigger than people I think who will have heard of have any idea of the term. We'll even look it up on their. I'm a criminologist. I am a criminologist. I suppose I am. And but I'm not. This is not for criminologists. This is. I'm hoping for to transcend animal rights or whatever. I hope.
Joe.
I was just because I was fascinated by. I'm not sure I quite understood everything you were saying, by the way.
Me neither.
No, that was no criticism of your speech. It was just I was stretching my intellect, I think, to understand it. But I mean, language is really, really important, and if you talk about the development of slaughterhouses, that's possibly first to do with economics and industrialisation of agriculture. Now, the majority of people don't want to know what happens to the animals that they eat. They shy away from it, And the use of language in hunting, for example, I've got loads of examples I wrote down here as you were speaking, but here's a classic one. They've stopped calling cub hunting. They now call it autumn hunting. Now, cub hunting, for those who don't know, is where they train the young hounds by finding a vixen and her cubs in a wood, surrounding the wood, and then letting the young hounds in with an experienced hound, so the hounds learn to like the taste of fox blood. Now, it's pretty disgusting, but they've now called that autumn hunting, instead of cub hunting.
What species is that?
Fox. But for me, I just wondered why you wanted the word, why you think it's important to have the word, because for me this is all about politics and campaigning, and the hunters and the shooters use language to hide the truth by trying to make it more acceptable, whether it's pest control, all these things. To me, the use of language is very political and deeply cultural. And I just wondered why you felt it was necessary to have this word.
I've had a long journey to get to this, and I wrote down several words that you said during your talk, and I'm going to get back to you maybe on those. But just let me illustrate by way of concrete example. There's no such thing as a concrete example. This is concrete as I can get. I have two pieces of information. One is the only reference I've ever seen to the amount of what are called gamecocks in the United States killed each year in cockerels face to face, and they tear each other to pieces. And I've heard that there are still as many as 400,000 of those killed each year like that. On the other hand, there are 4 billion chickens a year killed in slaughterhouses. 4 billion. That's the American billion, which I think is 4,000 million. I'm not sure. And yet nobody regards what goes on in slaughterhouses to chickens as very unacceptable. So I mean, I'd like to know if one. I'd like to know if one. I've written quite a lot on animal sexual assault, and I want to know if most people here are against bestiality. I assume probably everybody is. But you know, we take very seriously this very small-scale event, and we get up in arms about it, and yet it's altogether. It's not at all regarded in the same breath to eat animals. And so I'd like this word to step across all of these, and I said wrong there, I mean that's for debate, but I'd like one word to describe all the forms of killing of animals, instead of it being parcelled up into individual words. We have a word for homicide. Let's treat some animals, I mean where we treat, which animals or what animals is up for grabs, but let's at least give them the respect that they deserve. When we kill them, we do kill them in slaughterhouses, billions of them. Let's call that thericide. Or in laboratories.
Isn't the issue though with some of the different words, I mean, particularly sort of historically in terms of words like cull and crop being presented as sort of agricultural husbandry, the issue really is about motivation, isn't it? It's about what's you've just used, for example, an example between sort of game cocks and the chickens.
Yes.
Doing something, if you like, for pleasure, and to what some people might say is for eating. And the general, it would seem to me, the general sort of populace perception would be that killing to eat is not as emotionally driven as killing for pleasure. And so therefore, cull and kill...
Can you go slower on killing for eating is not as emotionally driven?
The motivation, the motivation behind it is different, is what most people would assume. Okay.
Who are you talking about when you attribute motives in that sentence? The motivation, whose motivation?
So the offender, if you like, for want of a better phrase. So isn't there an issue about what people perceive to be the motivation behind the act? And the reason there are these distinctive terms as opposed to an overarching one is because people want some indication of what was the motivation behind it. Yeah. Killing, anger, rage, blah blah blah. Cull for rational, survival purposes, let's say. And I just wonder if that's how you think about the fact that that distinction is often what people want.
I genuinely don't know how to answer you. It might be through ignorance, or it probably is, I'm not sure. But I will say that I've always been interested supremely in why people do the things that they do, and I'm very interested in individual motivation. I'm going to have to think about that. But that is a problem for me at the end of this paper, when we talk about whether it's socially acceptable or unacceptable, or legal or illegal. We can fit in motivations there. I mean, just as mens rea is supremely important in criminal law cases of homicide or whatever, it is important here. And I mean, you can add to that, the problems multiply, that where in the chain of causation does motivation begin and end, and who is culpable? And that's the whole thing about modern slaughterhouses, and as they have developed, that there's a brilliant book just published by Yale University Press called Every 12 Seconds, and this chap, Pachurat is his name, he went undercover in a fairly large slaughterhouse in Nebraska, which had employed about 800 workforce of, including management. And only one out of 841 workers actually could one say about them that they killed the unkilled cows. Only one out of 840. So it's not just outside that we're separated, it's inside. So the same point is there, isn't it? That's how slaughterhouses, for example, are constructed. And I suspect too, research laboratories, but I don't know. I don't have time to go into that, I think. But yeah, you're dead right. But then there are... What do you think?
Nice.
Yes, right. I see do that.
I think that if I can just well, I think that the problem, if you like, because you've stated sort of explicitly that you're not solely engaged, if you like, in an academic exercise. You're wanting, if you like, to reach
Yes.
sort of a wider audience. And it seems to me that it's not sufficient to say that stuff has just been hidden by words. It seems to me that those words have been used to denote a distinction. And so I think that if you can't answer that critique, for want of a better word, you've got a problem. But I don't have the answer to
distinction in what realm? What do you mean by distinction?
Well, I mean, so for example, saying to people that you can lump in, if you like, killing and culling, I think there's a problem in persuading people that those two things are the same. Now, we might think they are, but...
Killing is not culling?
Hmm?
Killing is not culling?
Well, I suppose it's about people's perception. I think people think of killing as something which has some form of either emotionally driven or malintent motivation.
Can I offer you then an honest...
Yeah.
I'm in the business of trying to change opinions.
Yes.
I'm going to go Keith, then Matthew, then Mark, I think it was. So, and then Jill, and then Gary. Okay.
I should have, whilst my first point was about the word, actually what I should have said is, I think this is a great idea. I think it's a great idea to try and get people to think about the world as it exists. But yes, okay, we might delineate these things by some form of relationship, so we think culling is better than killing, or but that actually misses the point, which is that you really should have an idea of why we have taken decisions to think X, Y, and Z, and that this is good, that's bad. And the only way to do that is to understand the thing at the bottom is that at some point something has died. And that is just to say...
It's not something has died, something has been killed.
Yes, sorry. Something has... No, you were completely right. At some point something has been killed.
Yeah.
And that is really, really important. I do have a word right, at that point, which is that the numbers are going to be huge. And people start not understanding large numbers. So when you actually look at what you do, that how many animals are killed, the numbers are just going to have so many zeros in them that you won't. That we find it hard to understand. Or more importantly, we start running this problem, which is that if we think that 4 billion chickens are killed, why should we worry about 120 foxes? Or why should we worry about X, Y, and Z? Because you get wrapped up in this huge number. And it's only a concern. I don't think it is, it was my worry about big numbers sometimes.
Okay, I can answer this one quickly. I can't give you a correct answer, I can just answer it. And that is that I am concerned with what counts as wildlife.
Yeah.
You
kind of moved on from my point.
Okay, Mark?
Yeah, it's kind of, I find all this very interesting, like Joe. It's stretching me to probably beyond the point of my intellect. But I come from a veterinary background, and it's there's a group of people, a profession that has quite a profound interest in this whole issue, and particularly the methodologies that people use to kill animals. And of course, you've only got to look at something like, I don't know, the American Veterinary Medical Association's recommendations on euthanasia to realise that the methodologies that are considered to be acceptable are all defined by the language we use to describe the process. Mm-hmm. So you've got euthanasia, and the methodologies that are acceptable for euthanasia will be perhaps different than the methodologies that are deemed acceptable for humane killing or for culling or for harvest or whatever. So I think language is incredibly important. But from the animal's perspective, the experience is the important thing, not the circumstance or the motivation of the person who's killing the animal. From the animal's perspective, it's being killed and it's going to end up dead. When you're looking at sort of definitions and the methodologies that you deem to be acceptable for definitions, it's very important to go back to look at it from the animal's perspective, not just the motivational perspective of the people who are carrying out the act. So, I don't know if that...
It does. I mean, that's really important, an answer to that. But it's not an answer, it's a question.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question,
yeah. I mean, there are people who... there are people who think that they can do that. There's a philosopher, on one end of the spectrum, there's a philosopher called Ernest Nagel, who wrote an essay a while ago called What Is It Like to Be a Bat? And he gave up, and henceforth philosophers have thought that we can't understand animals and that they may have no form of consciousness that we can understand. And on the other, there is Temple Grandin, who is an autist, who believes that she is one of the very few humans and other autists who can understand what cows experience. Hence, this is grotesque. She is able to construct humane slaughterhouses. Yeah, a large percentage of slaughterhouses in the United States are governed by recommendations made by Temple Grandin, and how you stand in relation to her is a litmus test for where you stand in relation to animals. So yes, you need to understand their experience, but how does one do that? What kind of experiences do animals have in slaughterhouses and being raised and fed like that? Or chickens, for example. When you see these silly labels, they're so misleading. Cage-free, cruelty-free, running around outside, and what experience? Yes, that's exactly, you're right. And there are people in the animal rights movement. I mean, there's a book written by Karen Davis called Thinking Like a Chicken, who she believes that one can really understand what it's like to be a chicken. I mean, she may well be right. And I don't know what the answer to your question is. It's one of those big ones. Well, I don't know. I mean, I haven't been to the moon, but I know it exists, and I know some things about it. But one probably you'd have to understand chicken think, wouldn't you, to understand that? It's like in the French Revolution, when somebody had their head cut off, two people made an agreement between each other that they wanted to know whether there was life after death, or what it was like when you had your head guillotined. So the agreement was that as soon as their head cut off, the agreement was that if this person felt something, they would mouth something to the other one and say yes, but they didn't.
Let's try it again.
Jill.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really fascinated by this issue of proper naming, because I think the issue of naming something throws a spotlight onto it. And when you started to speak, I immediately started to think of 1984. And in SOC's ideal world was to reduce the number of words available for people to use, with the thought behind it that it would reduce the ability to think about something. And I think this whole issue around the slaughterhouse, which is really the centre of it all,
yes, it is,
because its existence allows the existence of other things to go. You know, the usual argument why you're against hunting, or well, what about the billions of animals killed in slaughterhouses? And you know, it gives permission for other kinds of abuse. But of course, if you haven't the language to think about it, and if you haven't the language to think about that actually what happens is killing, whatever the intention might be, whatever you put a pattern of rationality around it, it is still ultimately killing. Now, some killing, as you say, is acceptable in law, other killing types of killings are not, but it's still the same act.
Absolutely.
So I think by naming something, gives you the ability to start thinking about something and to progress that thought, wherever it might take you. So
thank you. And I might even need to add something to the end of my paper, a couple of sentences on exactly that. I think that's dead right. Exactly that. It can actually propel us into further thinking. I need to think about that.
I think
just a very brief observation rather than a question, but of course, the term homicide itself doesn't actually, as I understand it, connotate anything about the mental reasoning or morality or mental moral culpability of the person doing the killing on another human being.
Yes, absolutely.
And as murder does.
Yes.
But you're right, and certainly English law is what I know. There is definitely part of the definition of murder is the non-legal killing of someone. There is Lord Cook's ancient, dicta on this. And there is such a thing as legal killing. Now we don't actually have many examples of it at the moment. E.g. death sentence and so on. So homicide itself, we have a word and we know what it means and it has power and so on. But in a sense, I don't think the fact that your word, as it were, doesn't distinguish between more morally cold.
No, I'm trying to just provide a platform
Exactly.
where somebody can recognise we need to name animals as being killed by humans first, and then what other people. I'm on to William Hogarth next. So what other people do with that is
we can have, like, you know, I suppose legal parasite, I suppose, and illegal, and you know, that's for the lawyers and others to decide. But the word, as it were, you know.
To get back to social acceptance, I mean,
exactly.
Most people think that it's okay to put animals in slaughterhouses and to kill them. I mean, we bred them for that purposes, therefore we actually gave them a life, and we're just shortening their lives. You know.
But it doesn't happen, as it were, your word is almost a level above or a level behind that, I suppose, in the way that homicide is too.
I'm hoping also it's way below that too. It's the lowest common denominator of all animals killed by humans, is the fact that they...
Yeah, I was going to add to that with the concept of legal killing and euthanasia, and how that relates to the animal world. And again, language is played with there. In the human side, euthanasia is usually thought to go along with ending somebody's life for humane reasons, whereas in the animal world, it's frequently transposed to being the opposite of that. Not always, but sometimes.
Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah. Well, for example, in Los Angeles at the moment, they euthanize 800 pit bull dogs a week.
Yeah.
And in America, HSUS suggests that it's between 2 and 3 million pit bulls euthanized in America, in the United States, that is, per year.
Yeah.
That's an enormous number, and practically 0% of that is done for humane reasons. The majority of it is done for legal or quasi-legal reasons. So there's a kind of reframing of the argument. The word usage is transposed, so that the euthanasia element to it is no longer a humane killing. It is a legalised killing. I just wonder if you had any...
The death
Where
for dogs.
Sorry?
The death penalty for dogs.
Yes, well, it has been seen as that, yes.
You know, I've also done some work on the medieval or the early modern criminal prosecution and capital punishment of animals, and of which there were none in Scotland or England. I'm so sorry, I've just forgotten and I'm sorry, I've actually just forgotten what I was going to say. Sorry.
No, I was talking about euthanasia and how the language is reframed, if you like, because when it's referring to humans, it has a connotation of empathetic, humane ending of life.
Yes.
But when, and of course that does happen in veterinary surgeries, of course, with animals that are suffering. But it's more frequently and more recently been transposed to mean something quite different.
On the other, yes, and what I was trying to get at just now is that I wonder how much of an advance we've actually made over the early modern era, when there were some quadrupeds who were tried for homicide. Actually, maybe as many as 200 of them, that's just documented. Whether there's a wonderful case, and several of them in mid-15th century France, where the sow rolls over in the middle of the night and squashes a human infant and put it on trial for murder. Learned counsel come down from Paris, prosecuting attorneys and defence attorneys, and she's given all the benefit, all the advantages of the majesty of the French law. And now, when you think of euthanasia in shelters, animals are just dispatched with not even a form sign, perhaps silently, invisibly, in vacuum chambers or with lethal injections, and that's not called. It's called euthanasia. It's called euthanasia. It's thericide to me. They're all. That is not okay.
Just comment on that. And it's an interesting point because again, coming with a veterinary background, I suspect this, to some extent it comes down to what I was saying earlier. I think you're right. Euthanasia was originally used very specifically to mean the the killing of an animal for the purposes of its own welfare, to benefit its own welfare. But euthanasia now has a meaning in the sense of the methodology that's acceptable to use, and I suspect that, so it's sort of come round the other side now. And you talk about euthanasia when you're talking about killing an animal by a particular method, regardless of the reason. So the original reason's been lost.
I wonder, I've never looked up the word euthanasia. I mean, it's obviously it's Greek, I mean, euthanatos, but I wonder whether it was invented by Francis Galton in eugenics and things. I wonder. I don't know whether it's an ancient word. Somebody can look it up. I don't know. We'll look it up. It's. Oh, sorry.
Any other?
Yes.
The word thericide, from what you said, I think it means that a human is killing an animal for human gain in some way. What about the animals that are protected by other animals being killed by humans, such as sort of mouth outbreaks and so on?
Yeah. What about the animals who are being protected by humans killing?
That would have otherwise died without that intervention.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a knee-jerk reaction to say that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, it's therocide, but it seems there are defences to that and good ones, which I would support. So yes, that's a. I think I need to add that in too. That's a good point that was remiss of me not to think about. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, now.
But it doesn't alter the fact that it is thericide. I mean, there are defences to that. Yeah,
it's not
justifiable
thericide.
Whereas everything else that's been spoken about has been some sort of human gain or human influence.
Yeah. Words like, I mean, we become who we are by. I mean, a lot of work has been done by ordinary folk, judging what humanity is in relation to our relationships with animals. So that's how we've partly evolved. And it's the massive anti-cruelty legislation is to do with human vanity and human gain and private profit.
Does there need to be gain of any form in this? Homicide doesn't.
No.
It just kills them.
No.
It's a human killing. I mean, in a way, you might be missing the point whether you have human gain or any gain. It's just a death. A death caused by a human. Yeah. And that's what the word needs to do, I think, as opposed to...
Although, I'm sorry, your name?
Sorry.
Nadine.
Nadine gave the example of the motivate. I mean, we're back to motivation again, and the point about killing BSE-infected cattle is that you might be doing not only good to humans, but you might be doing some good for a lot of cattle. So
you're technically saving lives,
yes,
so you can't call it the same name as killing.
I don't think that's true. I just think, I think the word, I think it is the definition of the action as opposed to the motivation. When you ascribe legality, or it could be, the benefit could be for any range of things. It could be because of BSE or for mouth disease, or it could be because you want to save a human life, or because you want to eat it. That's a different question to the thing which you need to understand.
It is still thericide, but if we then want to talk about whether thericide is justifiable or laudatory, that's something else, but it is still thericide. It's just simply the killing of an animal by a human for whatever reason.
Exactly.
Yeah, but she does give a very interesting thing that needs further comment. That, if one is talking, for example, about the difference between legality and other things.
What about roadkill?
What about roadkill?
Yeah. How would that come under it? Because roadkill is
that's a good. I've actually kept. I have kept track in where I live. I live in Maine, and I've kept track in the sense of documenting how it's represented in the media of crashes where humans are injured or killed by moose on the roads. There are about 5 a year where I live. And your question, what about them is...
What about the animals that are killed by humans
as
a result of roadkill? Like you say, in this country, down in Sussex at the moment, or Essex, there's a huge outcry in relation to the amount of animals that are being roadkilled.
That is also thericide, and when birds fly into planes, I mean, that's thericide. I mean, it's just simply the killing of animals by humans. Yes, I mean,
I think 2 points briefly. One, I think increasingly animals being killed are saved for example, in pit bulls, you often hear in the news when dogs are killed in this country, the term destroyed is used.
Yeah.
Destroy an animal. Increasingly, you are destroying an animal as if you are destroying a chair or a car. And I think destroying has replaced killing a lot. And the other point, what would you use to describe other animals killing other animals?
Yeah, I've always, since I read Tom Regan's book, Case for Animal Rights in 1983, I've always been a firm believer that we have no business policing behaviour between animals. That is their domain, we need to leave it to. I mean, there are cases, I'm sure that into every generalisation there is an exception, hopefully not to that one.
Could I just pick you up on that? What
yes.
you just said about animal. We are animal, aren't we?
Yes,
you
we are.
About human animal,
yeah.
But you're now putting a definition on in relation to animals. I mean, if we're all animals, it matters not whether we as humans think of animals creatures or animal human.
Oh, that's good.
How can you turn around and say there's a difference between an animal and the human?
Because everybody else does.
We're all. That's right. Because
but you know, I can't lock. I don't want to lock myself in my own. I don't want to lock myself in my own creation here. I want to appeal to people, and if we're all animals.
Yeah, and then if you're putting thericide as the killing of an animal, that would go for us as well as humans, wouldn't it? So therefore, then you've got the problem with murder,
except
manslaughter.
But you see, we do treat the killing of humans very seriously, but we don't treat the killing of animals by humans at all seriously. That's why I want to do this.
So therefore, if you're killing an animal creature, that's still murder, isn't it?
Well, I did say that in here that I'm not going to say that today or in this paper. That's for other occasions. I'd like to be able to see us talk about, okay, we have homicide and we have therocide, and then if we want to do something else, we can. If you want to call it murder, that's entirely your.
Is that not what it is?
That's not what I'm doing here today.
Because again, when you go back to the word murder, it's got a connotation, isn't it?
It might well be that, but that's not what I'm going to say today. I'm not involved in that business today. I'm in the business of trying to come up with the words that will describe the killing of animals by humans.
I believe I'm going to go Matthew than Matthew. I think that's
Is there? I'm just interested in the answer that you've just given. Is there any attempts at some sort of sequential action in what you're doing? So whilst you're not prepared to go as far as this today, once what you're trying to do is established, because it begs the obvious question, would that not then be the obvious step?
Yeah.
Is that intended?
Well, I know that writing about non-human animals in criminology is still very small. I've been doing it for quite a while, and anybody who knows what I've written knows that I'm very much a fellow traveller with the animal rights movement. So it's fairly obvious what the answer would be to me on that, or it's obvious what my answer would be. But I'm just trying to do something more elemental than that here.
But can I just pick you up on
absolutely. He's the chair. He's the boss.
Sorry, I'm going to let it go, but then I'm going to move. Just to let it go, then I'm going to move to Matthew, and then.
Because again, it's about what you just said. I come from. This is in relation to why I'm doing this about this word for animals, creatures, not humans. So from open it up to the wider, everybody. Don't you have to come off that chair if you're talking about putting a word to a specific action?
I thought I was amazingly off my chair by saying that we have to regard killing animals in slaughterhouses where they're chiefly killed.
No, I totally agree. I totally agree with it. But it's what you just said about.
Yeah, but I can only do one thing on one time.
Is more about the creature.
You can't expect me to do any more than what I've done here. If you want me to, if another time we can move on to that, but I'm not doing that here. I'm doing something. I'm starting with something earlier than that to provide other people's maybe just. Yeah, that sounds too grandiose. I'm just trying to do something simple here, not
academic ground clearing.
Ground clearing.
Ground clearing. Fire.
Okay, Matthew?
Just to recap and also, say what Keith really just said. It's the difference between this slightly more moralistic view of whether it is right or even legal to kill animals. It's the same relationship between the word proposed here and that action as the relationship between homicide and murder. We have homicide, which is killing one person, killing a human killing another human for whatever reason and with whatever morality. And then in England we have murder, which suggests high moral culpability, manslaughter, which suggests slightly less moral culpability. In the US we have first degree murder, which has lots of moral culpability, second, third, goes on, I'm not sure. And it's those words, it's the as it were, the corresponding version of those words that we're sort of, I think that some people are trying to push you to sort of respond to here, but which you're not trying to respond to. You're trying, my understanding is just keep very much to, as you say, the bottom line, which is the equivalent of homicide.
Everything you say, I absolutely agree with. And probably the chap in the corner over there, I probably agree with you too, but not I just want, maybe, I don't know. But,
I actually agree with your point that there is something about where we're on the one hand saying we're all animals, and why is there a different word at all? But on the other hand, you're right. Homicide doesn't mean
bad actions.
Killing what most
doesn't necessarily mean bad behaviour.
Yeah, but homicide also doesn't definitely mean at the moment killing animals, non-human animals. We want to use that. Therefore, there is a hole for that, isn't there? I mean, it's either you have to petition horribly, that you have to petition for years to get the word homicide recognised as including these other actions, or which is going to take a long time, or you have to, particularly if it's got the word home.
And you have to bring the animals out of the dungeon and talk about how historically they've been segregated away from the great majority of people, so that we don't regard that. Or we can't modern sensibilities.
Your solution is more elegant and much quicker in a sense. Let's work out a word that we can try and work on to do.
Joe?
I think I may be repeating what everybody else has just said actually, but it seems to me it's a great idea to have one word which sums up practically most of the relationship historically and now we have with animals, which is that we kill them in one way or another. And I think that's a great idea. But I think it does come back, the next stage I think is the really interesting one from my perspective, which is to try to stop people hurting animals and killing them, for pleasure, is come back to the differentiation about motivation and how language is used to hide that, and having a set of language which shows the reality of it. And I think it's got to be around the motivation and the purpose, because animals don't care what we call it. They end up, as Marcus said, as being killed. They just get killed in various degrees of horror. But I think the next stage is really important, which is that most of this is motivated by our purpose and by us. And I think it is useful, that next stage I'd be really interested in, in how we take that forward then.
I'm a sociologist, and I'm always acutely aware of how difficult it is to talk about the roles of motivation in social behaviour. Motivation can be manufactured. So if people have no motivation to harm animals, but they eat them, it's perhaps socially manufactured. I think there's a U-curve actually, where modern societies, once they reach a certain point, and it's possible it's reached it in Britain, I don't know, less meat per capita, less flesh per capita is eaten successfully one year after another. I know this is just incredibly small scale, but my son and others, who's 29, and other people of his age, I know that they're much more likely to be vegan than my generation was. I think there's a U-curve involved, and if you look at consumption of meat in China and India, it's rising massively, and it may well decline in the West as people become more educated. And the problem that I had with the two papers given this morning is that maybe this is because it's a criminology conference, maybe perhaps because it's a criminology conference, that's why your two papers were slanted towards criminal sanctions. I'm very, very interested in humane education. I'm a firm believer that's the only thing that will work in the long run, and that's over 2 generations. So, you better be here for the long haul. I do think that. And, somebody mentioned CCTV earlier. I'd like to talk about that too. That's something which is of great interest. Somebody mentioned to me it might be somebody here at this conference. No, it wasn't. It was somebody I met in Worcestershire, family I met in Worcestershire 3 days ago, who was about to do some work with with somebody working for the European Parliament on the introduction of CCTV in slaughterhouses. Now that's really interesting, but it's not clear to me who the object of the CCTV is there. And it's also complete, I mean, from what little I know about CCTV, the only, I'm bumbling on, I shouldn't stop. The only significant finding is that the major effect of it is to increase public fear of crime. So,
since we've moved on to that broader area,
yeah.
Well, I'm going to take that poison chalice and run with it. Piers has now taken over half an hour of questions, which I'm quite impressed with. What I wanted to do just for the last 10 minutes or so is to just open it up and see if there are any questions either for Keith or Joe that we didn't get to earlier on. Yeah.
I've got it written down somewhere there with you. Oh yeah, I wanted to ask this earlier, but didn't get an opportunity. It was just about going back to.
Could you say who was the question for?
Sorry, it's a question for Keith.
I'm going to get a bottle of water. I'm going to leave it.
And so it's just about. I just wondered if it seemed to me that I'm not as familiar as you or many others here with a lot of this stuff. So bear with me. You talked about that there was a beefing up of criminal sanctions through the use of tribal either way proceedings. But allied with that was the fact that deterrence of legal sanctions wasn't really occurring. And so it seemed to me that it wasn't really functioning. Okay? And so it seems to me that the only people you're going to get to be making that tribal either way choice are people who didn't expect to have been caught. And so how does that then work as a sort of beefing up, as a form of deterrent? Do you see what I mean? I might be a bit unclear there.
I think so. Can I try and answer it? And if I answered it incorrectly, it's because I didn't understand it, probably.
Yeah.
Or I'm just wrong. Actually, either of those are options. You can decide between yourselves which one of those you think it is. Now, the choice of North London.
Ice cream sales.
It's not normally like this.
Liar. Utter liar.
That was a lie.
Now, useful for criminology. One of the things which we thought is a problem with the current law is that it is too easy at the moment to internalise within a business structure or within someone's personal behaviour the criminal event. As I said, actually, within this, I think that in certain areas of wildlife law at the moment, crime pays. I actually think that is the case. We can back that up. So the point about putting things into making things triable either way, is that you get within the Crown Court, which means that you get longer sentences, and you can get potentially unlimited fines. Most importantly, you're more likely to be able to persuade people to do decent sentencing guidelines, which is actually the major failure here, and get the Sentencing Council to actually do something useful in this area, which means that I think that there is a problem for magistrates, which I don't actually blame them for, which is they don't really know what they should be ascribing to a wildlife crime. So what they do, and it's an awful problem with this whole area, which almost comes back to some of the other things that you were saying, is that they look for a comparator. So they sort of think, well, you know, I just did a death by dangerous driving, that would be max. But I've just done this case yesterday, and I think that actually my wildlife crime is worth slightly less than non-payment of a licence or driving 20 miles over the speed limit. So 50 quid or 100 quid or something like that. So the law is just incoherent. So the deterrence, which it's a European law requirement for wildlife crime, is by putting it somewhere where the state has to start thinking more coherently about it. Firstly, because there's greater powers available to sentence the person down for longer and a greater range of fines. At the moment, maximum normal wildlife crime is £5,000. There's two exceptions to that, but £5,000 is really not that much money. I think actually it's quite a lot of money, but again, it gets internalised within a business plan. It's easy to do that. So does that go some way.
So just to clarify, I mean, the audience for that change is as much magistrates as it is offenders then?
Yes. Well, not just, but it would also be the sentencing council, and
institutional changes.
Yes, you need both. It doesn't work if you just go to the Crown Court. You get incoherence of Crown.
I want to
say Piers, then Simon, then Nick.
I had a conversation with you last night, and about certainty. That not mine. That wildlife enforcement you've done has been very effective. I have no idea how you're going to work out how deterrence is effective. Not only that, you've got two populations to start with. You've got the group of the entire population of Britain who've never gone through the criminal justice system for violating wildlife, and then you've got people who've been arrested, convicted, and so on. So you've got you need to look at that population as well. How effective is your legislation in terms of the people who've already been convicted? Do they reoffend? And if they do or they don't, is it more or less than people who commit other kinds of crime?
That's true.
Yeah.
But in some ways, I don't know whether it's always the right way to think about it, because in a way, what we care about is something slightly different. In a way, we know, on the basis of a reasonable amount of scientific data, that the only things causing some species to decline must be unlawful taking. Really what you're looking for is the result. So the result, in a way, isn't an analysis necessarily of whether people have changed their behaviour in that sort of sense, because if one person does one thing differently, that person might not have actually done a particularly bad thing, but it would still have been a deviation from the required more. What you actually care about is the thing at the end, which is that the collapse of species stops or changes, and we comply with our end. Now, you can only actually really measure a legal system on this basis as to whether it delivers the result that it needs to do. And I would argue that the result here would probably be less welfare issues relating to animals and less collapse of species. And part of that is because it would be very hard to measure what you say. Say.
You need to look for carcasses, not offenders.
Yes, sort of. What I really need to do is look for number of lives, because in a way looking for carcasses even is the wrong.
We call dead animals carcasses. But you do. You need to look for that as well.
Simon, Nick, then Joey.
Sorry.
It's a question for Joe, really. Joe, you mentioned about when you're talking about hunting and trying to prevent it, charging people with conspiracy, and it just chimed with me around one of the current aspects to do with criminal offending from youth, and the issue to do with gangs and joint enterprise of people who are group involved or multiply involved in what may or end up being a homicide. And it's, I just wonder if you could say a little bit more about that. Is it an effective aspect of dealing with this, or is it ineffective? How?
Yeah, the answer is yes, it is, or it's beginning to be. And can I just, I find interesting esoteric argument that's just gone on there. The fact is, we know which bastards are going out there hunting illegally. We know the people who are snaring illegally, poisoning raptors. We know most of where the danger areas of gangs with dogs going badger baiting and all the rest of it. We know who all the terrier men are. We know who these offenders are. There are a small minority of people who are quite deliberate about going out there, deliberately harming our wildlife. I think there are separate issues around planning, development, and all those sorts of things. And actually, interesting thing is, me and Keith agree on most of. I agree with most of the stuff he said this morning. But that's not the point. The point is the way the law is used, or the way current licensing is used. The wildlife always comes off worst, right? All the time. licensed badger calls, licensed buzzard persecution, you name it, the wildlife always comes off worst. And also with the licensing and law, the hunters, and it's outside your review, I know, but during the passage of the Hunting Act, they wanted licensed hunting. And what they're trying to do now, in terms of overturning the Hunting Act, is to get licensed hunting coming back, right? And it would be a disaster. And actually we agree, because you said hunting is not an area you'd license, but there's a whole range of other things, I think, where we've got that balance wrong. I agree that things like the old planning process, which is got rid of now, is an area that you can properly look at the environmental impact of development and things like that, and it can be taken into account. It's not a place for courts, but some of this other stuff is. Now, what we find is that most of the wildlife crime that goes on out there is organised in to varying degrees. So what the Haythrop Hunt case was and under the Hunting Act itself, right? So this is a specific, they were under a specific part of the Hunting Act to show that it was a corporate body going out hunting, right? And what was prosecuted there was the Haythrop Hunt and their officials, not an individual hunter or an individual terrierman. But we are looking at developing, the trouble is getting evidence of conspiracy is quite difficult. But we are looking at that now to see whether we can develop that and take it outside the Hunting Act actually itself.
Any work around the social media aspects of that?
Yes. As I said, we're investing in that. The badger baiting people in up north, all the evidence was got from social media. And increasingly there's been one other case, the RSPCA took and got a successful prosecution, which was solely based on evidence got from social media. So that's why we're looking to invest in that whole area, because basically you can do it at home.
Yes, interesting.
Keith, for a quick follow-up,
yes.
and then Nick will be our final question.
Conspiracy is reasonably hard to make out in English law. I say reasonably hard. Okay, it's really quite hard. You know, unless you have you can get the three people pointing at a picture of a peregrine falcon and saying kill it, you're going to have evidential issues with it. One of the things that we did look at was trying to remove the driver and the beneficiary from the sort of non-compliant behaviour. This has in part happened in Scotland, where there is they call it slightly incorrectly vicarious liability, because it's not actually vicarious liability, but other than that minor naming problem, but it is where there's an individual who has control over a gamekeeper or someone. It was designed for birds, but it could be a developer speaking to a digger driver and saying do X. They get a benefit from it because they get less costs. But the person who's actually committed the underlying crime is the digger driver or the gamekeeper. And there are issues with that. Now, the way that they go about in Scotland is to create a reverse burden, and there are bits of offences which you could use because you have still incited or procured an offence, but these need to be understood better to try and remove the beneficiary, because the gamekeeper disappears or moves or things happen. You know, it's not that I don't think bad things happen to them, but you want to get to the beneficiary of the underlying wrong.
Right. This is where the incident is done by proxy, effectively. Is that what you're saying? Right. Okay.
Or a similar thing is with terriermen, with hunts. You know, when a fox goes to ground, the terriermen go in and dig up. And we prosecute terriermen, but the hunts, who they're under the direction of, completely stand back and say it's nothing to do with us. You know, and so I think that'd be really powerful.
Well, there's an interesting parallel there with the gang world, which I look at in my criminology hat. So, you know, between the elders and, you know, older gang-involved people and younger gang-involved people in committing acts by proxy. So there may be some interesting learning for you there.
Definitely.
Okay, Nick's point was a point of clarification, which I think he can address in the pub, possibly. So he's volunteered to give up his question and allow one last question if there's anybody who has one who hasn't yet asked the question. Yes? No? Okay, in that case, I shall give my closing remarks. I shall be very, very brief. First of all, could you thank all three speakers? And I'd like to thank you all for coming, because it's been a good seminar, which lively and interesting conversation. I only arrived at this university in mid-May, so I was a little bit stressed about whether or not we might be able to pull this off in a short space of time. I'd like to thank our fabulous administrator, Hayley, who has disappeared, but who did a lot of work to put this together. Our next seminar in this series, someone will correct me because there's a little bit of confusion, I believe is in Newcastle in October or November?
That's right, October 4th, we're having a whole day devoted to hazardous waste and pollution.
Yeah. To be followed by a seminar in Sheffield in February. What I will do after this session is, I will certainly, you've all got the delegate list. We have been filming and recording, so hopefully we'll be able to put all the sessions up on the internet at some point. It may take us some time, but we'll get it done as soon as we possibly can. Final thing I would like to say is people who are sticking around for an evening meal and for drinks, we're going to a pub just down the road, which is called the Cladder, and it's literally you just walk down there, and it's on the left-hand side. We've been able to reserve an area of the pub, which I'm childishly excited about. Not a function room, a whole area of the pub is ours.
What, you mean a pen?
No, there's like an area. So I know some people will be dashing off the trains and so on, but what we've done is we've arranged for food around 6:30. Some of you have already paid, but it means that there is time. If you booked food through our online booking store, it's all taken care of. But it means that there's time for drinks and discussion from basically now until about 6:30 when we'll have the food. And I just finally like to say, just to reiterate, as my boss said earlier on today, it's always sunny in Middlesex. You're welcome to come back anytime. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Stuff from